I looked a few things up, so I want to just go over them first before we begin. Number one, Ben's question yesterday, which touched upon prophecies regarding the second Beis Hamikdash. Ben had asked that maybe the second Beis Hamikdash was sort of the non-Jewish king, Koresh, and then later on Daryavesh. They gave permission to build the second Beis Hamikdash, and so there was a thought that was discussed yesterday that maybe it was not exactly divinely ordained, in the words of a prophecy. That, in other words, not that Hashem had told them to build it, and more that obviously it was meant from Hashem, but was it actually a command? And it's interesting. In the beginning of Chagi, one of the prophets of the Treyasar of the 12 prophets. So in the first chapter, so it says over here, Koy Amar Hashem, so says Hashem Tzavakos, Simu levavchem, place your hearts al darkechem, on your actions. Alu hahar, go up to the mountain, vahavesem eitz, and bring wood, uvnu habayas, build the house. Ve'erza boy, and I will want in it, meaning I will allow my presence to be there. V'ikavda, and I will. This is a famous word actually. V'ikavda, because it's missing a hey, and it says v'ikavda, I will honor it with my glory, so to speak. But it's missing a hey. What does that symbolize? That it's missing the 5 things that were missing in the second Beis Hamikdash. So it's missing a hey, symbolizing the 5 things that it's going to be missing. Amar Hashem, so says Hashem. So that's the verse. So it's a clear prophecy to Chagi about Chagai, clear prophecy about the second Beis Hamikdash to Chagai. Yes.
Can I say one thing?
Yeah.
I want, because my comment was that Yehuda was right in telling people not to go to Israel because they were not told by God to go to Israel yet. Not the building of the Beit HaMikdash. That you connected with another question.
Right. There was another discussion about the Beis HaMikdash.
Yeah, I didn't say Beis HaMikdash was not kosher. I said he didn't. Yehuda was right by saying not to go to Israel until God tells you to go.
Right. But God did tell them to. God did tell. Oh, you're saying to build the Beis HaMikdash versus going.
Right.
Versus going. Okay. In any event, that is a verse of emphasizing the clearly stating the prophecy. One of the prophecies about rebuilding the Beis Hamikdash, and it's how it's missing that letter Hey, which refers to the 5 things that were missing: the Aron, the Ark, the Urim, the Tumim, and the Eish. The Ark, the Urim, the Tumim is the special power, that the Choshen, that the breastplate would light up. It was missing that parchment that caused the breastplate to light up. That's called the Urim V'Tumim. And the Eish, the fire from heaven, the Shechina, the divine presence, and the Ruach HaKodesh, divine inspiration, that was all missing in the second Beis Hamikdash. And so what we were talking about was that yesterday, that there's a concept that because the second Beis Hamikdash was missing those 5 things, therefore, there's room to say that the second Beis Hamikdash was not fully permanent. That the first Beis Hamikdash was considered much more permanent. The second Beis Hamikdash was sort of like a substitute. And maybe we were trying to explain how Reb Yehuda might have felt that you're not allowed to go back to Israel from Bavel because there's a verse that talks about the first Beis Hamikdash. You should go to Bavel and you should stay there till Hashem calls you. And the idea, the thought that we were mentioning was that maybe that verse still applied. You should stay there till I call you, meaning I called you for a temporary return, but really your obligation to stay in Bavel really still exists until I really call you. In other words, for the temporarily I did call you, you came back, very nice. But ultimately, your obligation to stay outside of, to stay in exile really still is in existence until the third Beis Hamikdash. So that's a interesting insight, and that's the verse from the prophecy. Now, the other thing that I wanted to bring was I mentioned a Zohar yesterday. And this is a very interesting topic because generally we know that Brochos are supposed to be recited with your lips, and you're supposed to hear it with your ears. In fact, we had a Mishnah that spoke about what happens if you don't hear it. Lo hishmi'a la'oznov. It was on page 15a. If a person reads Shema and he doesn't hear it, so Yotza, the first opinion is he's Yaitzer. Rabbi Yossi says he's not Yaitzi. So it implied that the obligation is really to hear it with your ears. And if you don't, fine, you're Yaitzer according to Halacha and according to the Tanna Kama, the first opinion of the Mishnah, you're Yaitzer. And but it definitely implies like you're supposed to hear it, and the Gemara talks about that the verse, according to Rabbi Yossi, it's a verse that you have to hear it, and if you don't, you're not even Yaitza. But ultimately, it implies that you're supposed to hear the Shema. You're supposed to, and that applies to all brachos as well. That you're supposed to hear it. Now,
Rabbi,
yes.
It says belachash, means you should say it so quietly that only you should hear and not disturb others.
Well, that's our Gemara over here. That's the Gemara we learned, that you're not supposed to. We mentioned over here.
Yeah, you should hear it, but belachash.
Yeah, but we're talking about hearing it with your ears. You're supposed to hear.
But in the synagogue, actually, a lot of people are too loud.
Uh-huh.
Maybe they are deaf. I don't know.
You need to hire a policeman in your synagogue. A better gabbai.
Maybe they're partially deaf because they should disturb me.
There should be some type of a violation card that he hands out. Anyone that violates the rules, you give him the card or make him pay a little extra membership, more membership.
Like they do in soccer, right? Rabbi?
That I don't know. Is that what happens? Okay,
Yellow. Yeah, somebody does something wrong, they show him a yellow card. If he did it first time, second time gets a red card, and he's tossed out.
Right.
Can I say something else about it?
Yeah.
Actually, it says not to scream in shul. We had a person who used to come from Israel twice a year. I think he was a Rosh Yeshiva, I'm not sure. He used to scream as loud as anybody, but real sharp scream on the Kaddish when he said part of the Kaddish.
He would say the whole Kaddish?
He used to scream it real loud.
Interesting.
The only one ever.
Right. So this is the thing. In chapter 101 of the Mishnah Berurah, he brings because the Mechaber Rabbi Yosef Cairo writes that a person should not daven in their heart alone, but he should say the words with his lips and mashmi'a liyoznav belachash. He should make it heard to his ears quietly, but he shouldn't make it heard to others. And the Mishnah Berurah says, some say you should be careful for the words of the Zohar, that even lechatchila, preferably you should not hear it with your ears. You say it with your lips, but don't hear it. But the Magen Avram writes that it's not a proof from the Zohar, and so says the Bir Hagra, that maybe that also the Zohar agrees with the Shulchan Aruch, and that's what the other Achronim write, that it's better to hear it with your ears. But the Yevet, according to everyone, if you just said it quietly, that even you didn't hear it with your ears, since you said it with your lips, you have fulfilled your obligation. So that's the Mishnah Brura here on this in chapter 101 of Shulchan Aruch. Now it's interesting, the Mechaber in chapter the Beis Yosef, when he wrote his other book, he brings the Zohar there as well, and he says, and he brings as well as there's a Tosefta. Well, the Torah brings, actually, I should mention that the Torah brings that Yesh Oimrim, that some say so this is the Torah that some say. Let me read it here. Yesh Oimrim, this that it says you shouldn't hear it you shouldn't make it heard, that it should be quietly, and to the extent that you shouldn't even hear it with your own ears. And this is, they bring a proof from a Tosefta, which is like a brisa. It says maybe you should hear it with your ears. But Chana said, when in the story of Chana, it says Koilo lo yishama, her voice wasn't heard. However, the Torah continues. He says in our Gemara, it mentions only that you shouldn't make it heard to others, but for you, it should be heard. And this is what it says in Yerushalmi, and so writes the Rambam, and you should make it heard to your ears, but don't make it heard to others. Don't let others hear it. Okay. Now, in the Beis Yosef, when the Rabbi Yosef Kairi writes his commentary over here, he writes, however, in the Zohar that I wrote in chapter 141, he agrees with the Tosefta in Ro'i Lachoshlai. It's proper to be concerned. It's proper to be concerned about the Zohar. Interesting. So there is such a there's room for the Zohar. Now, I looked it up in the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch. He doesn't bring the Zohar, so it's and as we see in the Mishnah Brura, it's not the halacha, but it is broad. It is discussed in the Shulchan Aruch, and of course there is a Tosefta, as we see, that follows that logic. Now, there is one other discussion here, and that is the other. There is a leniency that it's broad in the Torah. The Torah brings a leniency that if you daven, let's say at home, for your family to hear you, that they should hear you davening and learn from you how to daven, how to say the words, how to pronounce the words. So it says that the Torah says that's fine. Now, what's the source? The source is the Yerushalmi. The Yerushalmi says that Rabbi Yoina says, when I davened in my house, I would daven out loud until, and this is the tricky word, until my family heard, they learned from me about davening. So when he davened in his house, he davened out loud until his family heard from him how to daven. Now the question is, what does that mean, until? Did he daven out loud in order for them to learn how to daven for him, to learn how to daven? Or did he daven out loud in order to have more kavanah? See, when you daven quietly, sometimes it's not as easy to have kavanah. Some people have more kavanah when they daven out loud. Why? Because they get more into it. They say it out loud, even though davening is with the heart, and it's your thoughts, your feelings. But in order to get into it, you daven, davening out loud does make it a little easier to get yourself into the mode. And so one way of reading this Yerushalmi, Jerusalem Talmud, is that he used to daven in his house out loud in order to have more kavanah, to the extent that his family would hear him. That's how loud he davened. That his family used to be able to hear him and learned how to daven from that. The other way of reading it is he used to daven out loud in order for his family to learn from him. So what's interesting is if you look in the Shulchan Aruch says that a person, of course, shouldn't daven too loud. He shouldn't make it heard to others, which we read. If he can't have kavanah by saying it quietly, it is permissible for him to recite the prayer, the Shemona Esrei, out loud if he's on his own. But in a congregation, it's prohibited because it's going to cause others to be Torah, lemitrad tzibura. He's going to ruin their concentration. Okay, so that's the Beis Yosef, Rabbi Yosef Kairo. So what does he say? What's the leniency if you want to daven out loud? What's the reason for the leniency? The reason is for kavanah, for good, and for be able to concentrate. You're going to say it out loud to concentrate. Okay, you're not going to bother other people. No problem. You can do that. What does the Ramah say on that? On that, the Ramah adds, but if you're reciting in your house out loud in order for your family members, that's permissible. And he quotes it from the Torah. So the Torah says that you're allowed to daven out loud to teach your family. The Beis Yosef, the Rabbi Yosef Kairo, doesn't say that. Rabbi Yosef Kairo says you're allowed to daven out loud for kavanah. So it seems that they're learning different ways of reading the Yerushalmi. One of them is reading it that Rabbi Yoina used to daven that way in order for his family to learn. That's the way the Torah understood it. But the other way, the Rabbi Yosef Kairo learned it, that you're allowed to daven out loud for a good reason, because Rabbi Yoina did it, and he davened so loud that his family was able to learn from him. But he didn't do it because of that. Because of that, it wouldn't be a good enough reason to daven out loud. He did it because kavanah. That's the way the Rabbi Yosef Kairo learns, that you're allowed to daven out loud for kavanah. Ramah adds in from the Torah that you're allowed to daven out loud to teach your family. So really, davening is supposed to be quietly, and this is like a leniency to daven out loud. And here we have these two opinions, and then we have the Zohar that says you shouldn't daven at all out loud. That you shouldn't even hear your words. And so, in order to explain all these opinions, the Rebbe has a whole explanation on these views. So I just want to share it with you in short, and that is that there's two reasons for davening. One of the reasons for davening is to request your needs. Bakashas tzracha. You need to request your needs. The other reason for davening is la'avdai b'chol levavchem, to serve Hashem with all your heart. So these two reasons are somewhat to give us a little room to understand these different opinions. Why? Well, our Gemara said that why shouldn't you daven out loud? What's the reason? The reason in our Gemara not to daven out loud was because it makes it look like you're not trusting Hashem that He hears you, right? Katnei amana. You don't have full faith in Hashem. He's not listening to you unless you scream. You're katnei amana, or you're acting like you're from the Nevi'ei HaSheker, from the false prophets who scream, gasei aruach. I'm sorry, they're the false prophets, and if you scream your prayers. So these are reasons that our Gemara says. What does it mean? That for these reasons, you're that would be one aspect of not davening out loud. It's sort of like a side reason. It makes it look like you're katnei amana. You don't have full faith in Hashem that He hears you. Now, the reason of according to the Torah, the whole prohibition of davening out loud is because of this reason. You're katnei amana. Now, you're in a scenario where you have a reason why you want to daven out loud, it should be permissible. because now you're not katnei amana. You don't have minimal. You're not minimizing your faith in Hashem. You have a reason. You want to teach your family. Okay, so it's not katnei amana. In other words, as long as you have a reason, it's permissible. That would be the Torah's reason that the way he understands Yerushalmi is because since davening is, the reason for davening is bakashas srochav, you're asking your needs. When you speak to a king, you're supposed to ask your needs with verbally. Right? When you ask a king for something, you verbalize what you need. So that's what davening really is. It's asking your needs. It makes sense to say it, to say the words, but the thing is that you shouldn't speak it so loud, because if you say it so loud, it is katnei amana. You look like you don't have trust that Hashem hears you. So therefore, if you have a reason why you're going to say it out loud, then it's fine. You're teaching your family. So that would be the reason of the Torah. And however, according to the Beis Yosef, Rabbi Yosef Kairoi, he says the reason of tefillah is, the main reason of davening is your kavana, your avodah shabalev, your feeling that you feel connected. You're connecting to Hashem. You're serving Hashem. And so, if that's the reason, so it comes out that if it's all about feeling, it's all about your emotional connection with Hashem. So then, in a certain sense, the speech, the dibur, has to be quietly, because if you would speak out loud, that would be the opposite of feeling. Feeling should be just your heart. Speaking out loud, it actually ruins it. People can't concentrate. If you scream it, speaking it would be the opposite of this feeling of kavanah. And so, even though speaking can get you into the kavanah, saying something out loud, but ultimately kavanah itself would be a contradiction to your feeling of closeness to Hashem, of serving Hashem, and therefore, Beis Yosef says you're not allowed to lift up your voice. You would never be allowed to, because the whole idea of davening is all your heart and it's all your kavanah, your intent. It's all about kavanah, and therefore you would never be allowed to. You want to teach your family? No, don't teach them when you're davening. You need kavanah, then fine. If it's for kavanah, that would be allowed. Now, this leads us to the Zohar. The Zohar says, don't even say the words. Why would the Zohar say, don't even hear the words yourself? Why should you not even hear the words yourself? Because by you, the whole idea of the Shemona Esrei, davening the Shemona Esrei, is the highest level of connection with Hashem. There's 4 levels in the davening. And the highest level, the world of Atzilus, the world of emanation, you're reaching when you reach Shemona Esrei, you're reaching this highest level. And that's what you're standing before the king. And so, being that you're standing right before the king, total bittul, total nullification. So when you have this total nullification, it has to be totally quiet, because you're fully subservient at this moment to Hashem, to the king. You're like you have total nullification to God, and therefore tefillah, prayer, has to be totally quiet. Bittul b'metzius, in the Kabbalistic language, it's called total nullification. And therefore, you're just pouring out your heart to your feelings to Hashem. You're connecting with Hashem, but you're nothing. You're feeling totally subservient. You're giving everything over to Hashem, and that you're nothing. And being nothing, you shouldn't even hear your voice. So according to Pnimius HaTorah, according to the hidden parts of Torah, this is what tefillah is. It has to be total quiet, that you shouldn't even hear it. And you don't feel yourself. In other words, it's all about not feeling the self. And so the idea of tefillah, according to the Zohar, is such a high level. It's basically that you are reflecting Hashem. You are transparent. Your connection, Hashem is, you're totally transparent to Hashem. Hashem reflects through you, and therefore your complete nullification. You shouldn't be reciting the words loud enough that you hear it, because you are totally nothing. You're empty. It's Hashem shining straight through you. That's the level of standing before the king in Shemona Esrei. Now the problem is that it does say that when Mashiach comes, La'asir Lavai, the prayer, the person who prays is going to be on a level where the Shemona Esrei will be done out loud. It'll be the koil kala, the voice of the kala. And normally the bride is quiet, and the husband is mashpia. He gives to the bride. The bride is the recipient. The groom is the giver. But it says when Mashiach comes, Eisha Schayel Ateres Bailam. The wife is going to be the crown of her husband. She'll be the mashpia. She'll be the giver. And so what does that mean? So it says in Shemona Esrei, we're going to say out loud when Mashiach comes. Why is that? It would seem that when Mashiach comes, we're going to have the ultimate nullification of the self. We're going to be totally nothing. So for sure, our Shemona Esrei should be ultimate quiet. How is it going to be that we're going to be reciting Shemona Esrei out loud? And so the answer is that when Mashiach comes, we're going to have such a connection to Hashem that before Mashiach comes, we're transparent. So we're nothing. And Hashem shines straight through us. Therefore, we don't want to feel the self. We don't want to hear ourselves. When Mashiach comes, it's not that we're going to be nothing and Hashem shines through us, but rather we are going to be, the whole world will be one with Hashem. That means we'll be one with Hashem. That means we won't be transparent. We will be part of the revelation of Hashem. And that means that our voice, it'll be really Hashem's voice. And so therefore, when Mashiach comes, we're going to be screaming, we're going to be saying the Shemona Esrei out loud, because that is the level of Hashem Echad, that Yisrael Kuchabrichu Kulachad, we are one with Hashem, will be revealed, that we are one, that our essence is the essence of Hashem. Man Malki Rabbanon, who are the kings, they are the rabbis, that we are, that in other words, we are one with Hashem. Our whole essence is the king, is Hashem, and it'll be revealed that the revelation, when Mashiach comes, it'll be totally one, everything will be one. And so that is the little understanding of the Zohar's view versus the halacha that we recite the Shemona Esrei, but we are supposed to hear it with our ears. And what's interesting is I believe that's the even though in there are areas of Shulchan Aruch that we follow the Zohar, I don't believe in this area we follow the Zohar, even among Hasidim. In other words, there are some places where they follow the Zohar, some halachas that we follow more the Zohar. If there's sometimes you find arguments between the Zohar and Shulchan Aruch, but in this scenario, it seems like the halacha follows the Shulchan Aruch even among Chassidim, and I believe the reason might be because this is on a you have to be on a very high level to feel that bittul that we talk about. That's the meaning of the Zohar, that you feel so nullified that you are totally you don't want to feel the self at all. So maybe a person has to be on that level to follow the Zohar. In any event, as far as I know, we don't follow the Zohar. We're supposed to hear it with our ears. That's what says Shulchan Aruch, and I didn't see any notes that the custom is anything different. I don't know if we have some Chassidim over here who know any better. David, do you have any information on this? Ruvain, any Chassidic scholars over here that want to share their thoughts? Isaac, you know about the other many groups of Chassidim. Do you know anything about this? Hearing with your ears the Shemona Esrei? Isaac? Yes, not. Okay. You're muted.
Question, I'm sorry.
I was wondering if you're familiar with any customs among Chassidim, among different groups of Chassidim, if they follow the Zohar in this situation.
Saying what?
Do they follow the Zohar of not hearing the Shemona Esrei? They don't even hear it themselves. They say the words, but they don't hear it. You familiar with any? No. Okay, it sounds like
No, not at all.
no one follows. It sounds like no one follows the Zohar. Maybe tzaddikim, maybe Kabbalists, maybe follow the Zohar. But I'm saying the Beis Yosef, you're for sure fulfill the obligation if you follow the Zohar, even according to Shulchan Aruch, you fulfilled the mitzvah. But Shulchan Aruch encourages one to hear it with his ears. So, and that's what it seems like is the clearly the halacha.
I have to interrupt you.
Yes, it's not interrupting. We just concluded that topic. Yes.
Okay. I'm very confused because the self is nullified. If there's no self there, then how can you be subservient?
Well, that is the act of subservience, is that you are totally giving yourself over to Hashem. It's the highest level of subservience. In
other words, what you're saying is that there's no self, there's no ego, there's nothing there, and that's being subservient, is what
you
you're
are
saying.
Right, exactly. You are a total servant of Hashem.
You're still recognizing that there's a self.
That's because
what I'm getting at?
That's because you haven't reached that level.
I'm saying that
it's very hard to reach that level. I don't know if it's expected of you today to reach it, but that's something to strive for, that we are constantly trying to humble ourselves before Hashem and be totally subservient to Hashem and keep on climbing the ladder.
One more thing. When you daven, you request your needs and you also serve Hashem.
Right. So it seems like we do both.
Ask for anything. I never ask for anything.
Well, you should. You should. The davening definitely includes both. Question is, what's the main part of that? What's the main element of davening? But if you read through the meaning of the prayers, if you're saying those prayers, you are asking for stuff, because part of those prayers is, give me knowledge, give me healing, return me to tshuva, forgive me, bring redemption, give me sustenance. So you're saying those words. I don't know.
So
I don't know if you're having in mind.
Prayers, so in the davening prayers themselves, you have all these requests.
Yeah, they're right in there. Sure. The main part of the prayers that we've been talking about throughout these discussions is the Shmona Esrei, the Amidah, the 19 blessings.
Right.
It's called Shmona Esrei 18, but it really is 19 blessings. These 19 blessings are the main part, and throughout them, it's clearly that you're requesting things. Yeah. Now, the more subservient you are, the more you're asking Hashem for these things.
It's my bird. I'm sorry.
No. I have some kids in the background playing. Some nieces of mine are in town. Could you please quiet down? The more subservient you are, the more your requests are more for Hashem's purposes. Why do you want money? You want it to be able to serve Hashem better. Why do you want health? Because you want it to serve Hashem better. Why do you want knowledge? You want to be able to serve Hashem better with it. Understand Torah better. Connect with Hashem better. Why do you want all of these prayers? You want Mashiach to come in order that Hashem's revelation, in order that Hashem will be able to not be homeless anymore. Shchinta begalusa, the Shechina, the divine presence is in Golus now. So we want Mashiach so that Hashem will be able to reveal himself and won't be homeless. Why do we want the building of Yerushalayim? So that it won't be an embarrassment for Hashem that why do we want the return of all the exiles? So that it won't be an embarrassment that the nations of the world rule over us. Hashem his glory should shine. Everyone should realize that Hashem is great and the greatest. And therefore, all of these, the more subservient you are, the more all of your prayers are really for Hashem's purposes. The more selfless you are. Okay. Now we're going to go back to there's one other thing that someone had asked me about wearing a head covering a person who's divorced or a widow, would she wear a head covering? So it's actually right in Shulchan Aruch in chapter 21 of Even HaEzer. It says over here that daughters lo seilachna b'nais Yisrael truais reish. Daughters of Israel should not go b'shuk in the marketplace with the head uncovered. Achas penuya, whether the woman is single, v'achas eishes ish, whether she is married. So even single women should not go without a head covering. And so the commentaries explain that, what do you mean? Single? All girls go without head coverings. So they explain, no, it doesn't mean single, never married. It means once they were married once, if they're single now, they're supposed to wear a head covering. So the Shulchan Aruch, in the words of the Shulchan Aruch, he clearly states whether you're married or whether you're single. And he's not talking about before marriage. He's obviously talking about after a marriage ends, whether it ends through divorce or ends through through death. The widow is or the divorcee is obligated to go outside with a head covering. Although I did mention that there is room for leniency for major necessities. That I mentioned the case where a woman had to support her children, her husband passed away, and this was the only way she could support them. So, I did mention that there are scenarios where a person can get a heter because it's more lenient, a woman who's not married than a woman who is married. A woman who's married, there's no leniency. A woman who's not married, she was married before, it's less strict. The obligation of wearing a head covering is not as strict. Please don't make noise. Okay, let's go to the Gemara. Okay, so yesterday we learned that Mashmiach Koiloi B'Tfilasoi is Mikatnei Amana, is a person who makes his voice heard in his tefillah. He's from Katnei Amana. He has shows that he doesn't have trust that Hashem hears his prayer. And Rav Huna says that this is only if he could be Sheyachol Chaven, that he could have kavana. But if he can't have kavana, it is permissible to say the words louder, as long as it's only biyachid. If it's alone and it's not in a tzibur, in a congregation. Then we spoke about Reb Abba wanted to go to Eretz Yisrael, but he was trying to stay away from Rav Yehuda because Rav Yehuda held it's prohibited to go to Eretz Yisrael, and he brought this verse. We spoke about it, about the fact that the verse is really talking about the first Beis HaMikdash, but nevertheless, he held that you're not allowed to go to Eretz Yisrael, and therefore Rav Abba was trying to not be seen by him. He was sort of like hiding from him. But then he said, I really want to hear something. And so he went to the Beis Medrash, stood outside, and he went to the Beis Medrash and he heard the Tana saying things in front of Rav Yehuda, which means the Tana means the person who knew all the Mishnahs by heart. And he said, and Reb Abba heard of something that he liked a lot. What was it? That if a person passed gas, the halacha is you have to wait and then before you daven. And some say that if a person needs to pass gas, he should go out of his Shemona Esrei 4 amos and wait until the smell goes away, and then he goes and davens. And he says a certain prayer, Rabbeinu Shalom, you created me with the orifices and hollows and cavities. And Golav Yodua, it's known before you that are embarrassment and and how in our life and in our death we're eaten by worms and maggots, and then he goes and davens where he goes back to where he started. So he said, if I only heard this, it would be it was worth the whole thing, worth coming here. He learned something new about halacha. Okay, and I should mention that there is an argument. When do you walk back? If a person walked out of their Shemon Esrei 4 amas, in other words, a person's in the middle of Shemon Esrei and they pass gas and they can't control themselves, so they're supposed to walk out 4 cubits, which is 6 to 8 feet, and then they recite this prayer. And so the question is, when do you walk back? Do you walk back before you recite the prayer or after? It's an argument among the commentaries. When do you walk back into the Shemona Esrei? So, but the halacha is you have to wait until the smell goes away, and a person would recite this prayer. Now, if a person's in shul, of course, you don't do this because it's too embarrassing. But it's interesting. The Mishnah Berurah writes that a person should wait until the smell goes away, and then he says he doesn't say this prayer, but he should think this prayer. So that's an interesting addition of the Mishnah Berurah that he mentions that. Now, the Gemara that we're up to is the 2 dots, Tana Rabbanan.
Rabbi,
Yes.
you just said that basically because the way it's written over here, and he begins from the place where he stopped. It says, "Matchil mimakom shepasa." So, if he were to say it out loud, wouldn't that? I mean, depending on where he is, isn't that a hefsek in his Shemona Esrei in doing that?
It is. It's very shocking. This is why Rabbi Abba was shocked. He didn't. One of the reasons, at least, or maybe the main reason why he was so impressed with this is that you're allowed to recite a prayer like that in the middle of Shemona Esrei.
Maybe that's why the Shulchan Aruch basically says to say it, not to say it per se, but to think it.
Well, the Shulchan Aruch doesn't say that. It's the Mishnah Berurah who's the Shulchan Aruch just mentions that if you're in shul, you wouldn't.
Well, the Mishnah
pull it up over here. Let me see. In Shulchan Aruch it says, and you say this prayer, and in the Ramah adds in, this is only if you're in your house. If you're in shul, it's too embarrassing. You don't move, and also you shouldn't say it. Just wait until the smell goes away. So it could be that now the Mishnah Berurah then says that that you shouldn't say it, but it's good to think it. Now, and the Alter Rebbe doesn't mention this about thinking it, but the Mishnah Berurah says it. It's good to think it. Now it could be because while you're standing there in the place where you're davening, let me just see 1 second. Yeah, I think this is very interesting. I just mentioned that there's an argument when to say the Riboin, this prayer, Riboin Ha'olamim. When do you say this prayer? So the Shulchan Aruch says you say it while you walked away from Shemona Esrei. You walked out of your Shemona Esrei, 6 to 8 feet. You now recite this prayer, and then you go back to your place. Now, the reason maybe why you're allowed to be mafsit, separate, make an interruption, and say it is because you're not standing where you were standing when you said the Shemona Esrei. However, in shul, you don't walk away. You stay there where you are because too embarrassing. If you're staying where you are, you're not allowed to say it. There you don't have the leniency that you could say this prayer. The Mishnah Berurah says you should think it. Alter Rebbe doesn't hold that, doesn't say that. But the Mishnah Berurah says you should think it where you are, but you can't say it because that would be a hefsek. So the leniency of reciting this prayer seems to be specifically if you're going out of your place. Now, there is one opinion that says the opposite, that you go back to your place and then say the Ribono Ha'olam. But the Shulchan Aruch and the Alter Rebbe both say it's the opposite, that you first say it while you're away from where you're standing. So it seems like that might be the logic behind this, that because because now it's not the interruption, you're allowed to interrupt with this prayer because you're not standing in the Shemoneh Esrei. Anyway, just a thought of maybe that's the reason of those views. Yes, Ruvain.
It seems that it's you're not making a hefsek by saying this prayer, this tefillah, because you've already made a hefsek. You've already stopped.
Right. True.
So it's not like you stopped and it's already stopped. So it's not a hefsek, it seems.
Good point. I think it does mention something along those lines.
Rabbi, if that happens, that means you are aware of yourself and you're not really, in other words, if you realize, is this before
just 1 second, Susan? Ruben, what you said is clearly written in the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch. Since this saying is not considered a hefsek, since you already interrupted through this, through passing gas, and then you go back to your place afterwards, and don't finish your Shemoneh Esrei where you are, since you already started to daven in the other place, and that's where the Shechina is. And then you left the Shechina, so you have to go back to the place where the Shechina is. So the Shechina stayed in where you started davening. You left the Shechina. Now you already interrupted, so you're allowed to say this prayer. Now he says nowadays we don't do this, and some say it's only when a person davens in the house, but when you daven in a community, it's embarrassment. A congregation, it's an embarrassment. So you don't have to separate. And since you don't separate, you shouldn't say it. You shouldn't say the Ribono Ha'olam because, so he says a different reason. Okay, so you know what? I have to take that back. He says the reason why you don't say it is not because of hefsek, but it's because if you're not leaving your place, the prayer doesn't really flow. The prayer is about your embarrassment, but you're not really embarrassed because it's not visible, your embarrassment. So therefore, you just wait until the smell goes away and you continue davening. Thank you for bringing this up, Ruvain. You corrected me. Okay, so it's a good point over here. So that's really the reason. So that comes back to Ezra's question. So it's not considered a hefsek because you already interrupted. You already interrupted, and the reason you don't say it is because the prayer doesn't fit so perfectly. It's not the embarrassment is not visible. Okay, very good. That's great. Now, Susan, you had a question.
The thing that I'm troubled over is that any kind of bodily function, if you are aware of it, that means that you're not fully in other words, don't have kavona with the prayers. If you're aware,
that's a very interesting thought. I mean, it's not so. Your body is not dependent on your intention.
You're not.
Your body
separated. I'm saying that you're not. Your body is here. You're not really separated from your body unless you're in a transcendental state.
Right.
You can't possibly do that every time you are davening. To me, it's a very difficult thing to go beyond your body.
That's exactly what we're talking about. Why are you saying this? Isn't that exactly what we're saying here? This is exactly what we're saying, that you don't have full control, There are
Okay.
times when you're going to need to have, you're going to need some,
All
you know,
right,
you're
okay,
going to need to do things. Why would you even mention that? Okay, so
okay.
that's what we're talking about. So now the Gemara, we're at the two dots. Tana Rabbanan, the rabbis learned. We're 19 lines up from the bottom, 20 lines up from the bottom. Tana
Rabbi,
Rabbanan hayoshin b'talisai. If a person was,
Rabbi.
yes,
Yeah, I'm not sure, but I think that what Susan's talking about is she's troubled over the different levels of nullification. If a person is really nullified, there's one level of nullification where a person says, I'm nullified to Hashem and I'm davening to Hashem. There's a higher level of nullification where you're so nullified, it's not you anymore davening to Hashem, it's you and Hashem together. So I think she's asking about if a person's really nullified, how's he a separate entity who's davening to Hashem? I think that's her question.
right. I can't answer such questions because I'm not on that level.
Well, there's just different levels of nullification. There's a lower level where a person can still function as a separate entity. And then there's a very high level where a person's not functioning as a separate entity.
Right.
And I think
Okay.
that's
The
the
answer?
point of confusion.
Okay, I guess that if that answers, great. Okay, Tana Rabbanan, the rabbis learned, Yashin b'talisa, if a person was sleeping with their garment, but he can't take his head out of the garment because it's cold. So he's naked he's naked where he is, under his either garment or top sheet, you could say. He's under some cloth, and the only problem is his head is under it as well. And he doesn't want to take his head out to say the Shema. So we have a few problems. Is he considered naked because he sees his body? Is there a problem of him not separating his head from his private area and not separating his heart from his private area? We spoke about both of those obligations, that a person is obligated to separate their heart should not see their erva, and their head should not see their erva. Now, I just saw that there's another reason. I gave one reason before why that is, and that, in other words, why should a person their heart not be able to see their private area? And you need to have a separation, like a little a gartel or some type of your pants, your underwear, something that covers, the underwear covers the whole private area, but really just the string around you would be enough to separate between your heart and your private area and between your head and your private area. But the thing is, why do you need that? So I mentioned that one of the reasons that I saw in the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch is that it's because the Shechina, the Hashem rests more in those two organs, meaning your neshama basically is in the head, and it spreads mainly to the heart. So those two organs, there's more, so to speak, holiness, and therefore you need to separate that from your private area. But I did see there's another reason, and it's based on the pasuk. The pasuk says that v'lo yira b'cha ervas davar, your erva should not be seen. So it shouldn't be seen, which also includes, it says the heart sees. There is a concept of the heart seeing in the poetic verses of the Torah. It does use the concept of the heart seeing. And because it says the heart sees, therefore the heart also shouldn't see your private area. So based on the verse of not seeing, it also includes the heart. Not only would the head be included, but it would also be the heart should not be able to see, because it is quoted that it says the heart see in I guess in other verses in Torah. Okay, yes, Ben.
I wanted to say, it says here talit, not garment, and I think they are talking about a talit that you cover your upper body and head, but you don't cover your bottom of you. So that's a separation. The heart is covered.
Okay, let's see if that fits. Sounds good. Let's see if it fits. We're going to read the Gemara, and now we'll see if it fits. So if a person was sleeping with this talit, if you want to follow Ben's explanation or follow my explanation, you try it. The Eina Yachal Haitzias Roishe can't put his head out because it's cold. You have to separate with the talus, with this talus on your neck, and read Kriya Shema.
Take it
And
off your head
what that
so you can
means,
read.
that make sure that it is touching and attached, so to speak. It's connected to your neck, that it, so to speak, it separates. In other words, it shouldn't be loose in that area. And some say you should do that by your heart, that it should be, use this talus to separate from your heart, separate to your erva, to your private area. So that's what a person has to cover, has to make sure that he makes a separation. Two opinions: is it just the head, or is it also the heart?
We're not talking about a world where they wore pants. These are for robes mostly. It should not be a straight line up between your erva and your heart, so that by pulling even the talus tight around you, you are sort of separate.
Right. So that's what we're dealing with. The person was sleeping naked, and therefore you need to separate. The only surprising thing is that the first opinion said all you need to do is separate the head. What about the heart? The second opinion is fine. The second opinion says the heart. So that's what the Gemara says over here. Tanakama, the Gemara asks, what about the Tanakama, the first opinion? What about the first opinion? His heart is seeing his private area. He holds that the heart is allowed to see the erva. The heart is allowed to see the private area. That's the other. That's one opinion. We of course we don't follow that, but that is such a view. If a person is walking in places that are dirty, he should put his hand over his mouth and recite the Kriya Shema. So this is a unique statement that Rav Huna in the name of Rabbi Yochanan says, a new thing. The first statement was talking about covering oneself, and therefore the issue was making a separation, and that was either on the head or on the heart. And now the Gemara says a new thing, that a person is walking in places that are dirty. So you put your hand over your mouth and you read Shema. Amrale Rav Chizda Halikim. I swear by Hashem. Im Amrali Rabbi Yochanan b'fumei. If Rabbi Yochanan said this to me with his mouth, I would not even listen to him. Because how can you say such a thing? That you can recite Shema while you're in front of schmutz, your disgusting, dirt, smelly place. You're going to be able to recite Shema when you just put your hand over your head, over your mouth. And some say that it wasn't Rabbi Yochanan, Rav Huna in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, but it was Amar Rabba Bar Bachana, Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Different names. Some say it was said in a different rabbi said it in the name of another rabbi. If a person was going in these places, you put your hand over your mouth and you say Kriya Shema. Amar le Rabbi Yochanan, and according to that version, Rabbi Yochanan also said the same thing. He said, by Hashem, by God. In other words, he's like swearing. If Amrali Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, if Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi said it with his own mouth, I wouldn't listen to him. In other words, now it was said in the name of him. Rabbi Bar Bachana said it in his name. But even if he told it to me, even if he said it in front of me, I wouldn't listen to him, because I don't agree with that. Did Rav Huna really say? So again, we have Rav Huna in the name of Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Bar Bachana in the name of Yeshua ben Levi. So Rav Huna said this halacha. So the Gemara asks, did Rav Huna really say this? Rav Huna, doesn't Rav Huna say that a Talmud Chacham is not even allowed to stand in such a place? Because a Talmud Chacham is constantly thinking about Torah, and it's impossible for him to stand there without thinking Torah. So how could Rav Huna say that you would be allowed to even say Shema in such a place? He says you're not even allowed to stand in such a place because you're not allowed to think Torah. And here we're telling him he could say Torah, he could even say Shema. So the Gemara answers like kasha. It's not a question, not a problem. It's not a contradiction. There's a difference if you are standing in one place, where Rav Huna says, don't stand in a dirty place because you're not even allowed to think Torah when you're standing in one place. Here is when you're going, when you're traveling, when you're walking, and you're walking through a dirty area. That's a different law. Why is it different? Because the pasuk says, "V'haya machanecha kadosh." Your machane, your camp should be holy. Now, when you are walking through a place, that place where you're walking through is not called your machane, your camp, because you're not resting, you're not stopping. You're walking through. So that place is not your camp. It doesn't have to be holy and pure. You have to cover your mouth because it wouldn't be appropriate, but you're allowed to say Shema, according to this opinion. But when you're standing in one place, that is called your camp. Your camp has to be pure. You cannot have dirt in that place when you're saying holy words, or when you're even thinking, according to him, when you're thinking holy words, you're not allowed to have it in that place. So therefore, which is the halacha, by the way, you're not allowed to think Torah in front of shmutz. You're allowed to think Torah in front of erva, in front of nakedness. You would be allowed to think Torah, because it only says v'haya machanecha kadosh, but by erva, when it talks about nakedness, it says v'lo yira b'cha. You shouldn't v'lo yira b'cha ervas davar. It says davar, which means speech. So you're not allowed to say Torah in front of erva. You could think Torah. When it comes to dirt, shmutz, real dirt, I'm talking about real smelly dirt, that you would not be allowed to even think Torah. And so so Rav Huna is saying that even though he says regarding walking in the makom hatnifes, that you could, if you're walking through, you would be allowed to say Shema if you cover your mouth. So, but when it comes to standing in one place, you would not be allowed to think divrei Torah. Okay, I'm going to have to stop here because it's too late. Unless everyone wants to continue for another 5-10 minutes. Is that okay, everyone? You can handle another 5-10 minutes? Okay, let's continue because I want to finish the chapter before the end of the session, semester next week. We're finishing Thursday, Mitzvah Hashem. So let's go a little further. So we just answered the contradiction. It depends if the person is standing in one place or one is going. Now the Gemara asks, does Rabbi Yochanan really say this halacha about saying Shema in your dirty place? Didn't Rabba Bar Bar Chana say, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Chol Makom Mutar L'Ha'ar Divrei Torah, Chutz Mi Beis HaMerchotz, Mi Beis HaKisei. In all places, a person is allowed to think Divrei Torah, except in a Beis HaMerchotz and Mi Beis HaKisei, which means that you're not allowed in those places. A Beis HaMerchotz is a bathhouse. Beis HaKisei is a bathroom. You're not allowed to think Torah in these places, except all other places. You would be allowed to think Torah. Now, what does this mean? That you're not allowed to think Torah in a Beis HaKisei, in a bathroom. Now, if you're not allowed to think Torah there, why are you allowed to say Shema when you're walking through a makom hatnifes, a dirty place? How could that be? You're not allowed to think Torah in any of these places. And here we're going to let you say Torah.
Accidental. It's an act. It's like one. In other words, if you're walking through it and you don't know the shmutz is there.
No, we're talking where you know. We're talking where you know. So the thing is,
both of them are places where you're standing. It's like you're making that your machane. So therefore you can't, and because of what it is, therefore you can't speak words of Torah.
Yeah. But the Gemara does ask, it says, maybe you could say that it's not talking about where you're standing. I know, we know that it's not, maybe one case is talking about where you're standing there. The other case is talking about where you're walking. And maybe you could say the same answer, like we just answered earlier for Rav Huna. Let's answer the same thing for Rabbi Yochanan. Maybe you could say the same answer. One place is clearly talking about where you're walking, and the other one is talking about where you're standing. One place is where you're standing in the same place. That's where you're not allowed to think Torah. The other place is where you're walking. When you're walking, you're allowed to say Torah because this is not called your camp. This is not your place. So even if there's dirt there, you're walking through it. But that's not really where you are. So therefore, you're not really planning on staying there. Therefore, it's not considered a problem to recite Torah as long as you cover your mouth. So maybe you'll answer that with that. Amy, is that so? Could you answer such a thing? Didn't Rabbi Yavo have a ka'azel basrei to Rabbi Yochanan have a kakari kriyashma? Rabbi Yavo was going after Rabbi Yochanan. He was reading Shema. When he went to these dirty places, Ishtik, Rabbi Yavo stopped saying Shema. Rabbi Yavo was in the middle of Shema and he stopped. He didn't do this. He didn't follow this. You say Shema with your mouth. He stopped saying Shema. Amar Leila Rabbi Yochanan, and then he told Rabbi Yochanan, Lehechon ahader. In the middle of Shema, he goes to Rabbi Yochanan and he says, Oive, what do I do now? Where do I go back to? I stopped now for 3 minutes or 2 minutes or 1 minute. I stopped saying Shema because of it was dirty. Now, what do I do? Rabbi Yochanan, his rabbi was right there. And he asked him, the big scholar, he said, what do I do now? Where do I go? Do I have to start all over? Or can I just go back to where I was up to? So Amar Lei, Rabbi Yochanan answered him, Im shahisak te lugmar eskula. If you waited the amount of time it would take you to recite the whole thing, chayzer l'roish, you got to go back to the beginning because you waited too long. Your interruption was too long. You have to go back to the beginning. So you see that this is the Gemara's question. We see that Rabbi Vohu and Rabbi Yochanan really is the main proof. Rabbi Yochanan replied to Rabbi Vohu that implying that what Rabbi Vohu did was correct. He stopped saying Shema, and now when he starts it again, he actually might have to go back all the way to the beginning if he stopped the amount of time that it takes to recite the whole thing. So it seems like Rabbi Yochanan agrees that you weren't allowed to recite the Shema in a dirty place. So hachi kamarle. So the Gemara answers no. This is what he meant to say. Lididi loy spirally. To me, I don't hold this halacha like you, Rabbi Vo. I hold you're allowed to say Shema even in a dirty place, because you're going to put your mouth over the place. You're walking. We're walking. It's a dirty place, but you're walking through it. You're not stopping. Really, I hold it's fine. You could continue reciting Shema. L'didach, but to you, disviralach, that you hold that this is a problem to recite words of Torah in a dirty place, because even if you're walking and you stopped saying the whole thing and you hold it's prohibited, if you waited the amount of time it would take to recite the entire thing, you do have to go back to the beginning according to your opinion. So Rabbi Yochanan was paskening, he was giving a verdict to Rabbi Vo based on Rabbi Vohu's view, even though Rabbi Yochanan doesn't really follow that view. So what comes out from here is that according to Rabbi Yochanan, you're allowed to recite Torah in a place that's dirty as long as you're walking through it. If you're not walking through it, you're not even allowed to think Torah if you're standing in that place. But if you're walking through it, it would be allowed as long as you cover your mouth. And Rabbi Vohu is of the opinion that it would not be allowed because you have to be quiet. And according to that, if you're not allowed to say Shema in a place, and because you're not allowed to, you stop. So what comes out is that if you wait the amount of time it would take to say the whole Shema, and you waited because you're not allowed to say Shema, that would be considered an interruption. You interrupted in a situation where you were unable to say Shema. If you interrupted in a place where you're allowed to say it, you just stopped for whatever reason, then even if you waited the amount of time it would take to say the entire Shema, no problem. You waited, you stopped, it's not a big deal. But if you interrupted the amount of time that it would take to and you interrupted the amount of time it would take to say the whole Shema because you weren't able to, you're in a place where you're unable to, that's why you would have to start all over again. That's a similar law when you take off your tallis to go to the bathroom, or when you take off your tefillin to go to the bathroom. What do I mean? When you take off your tefillin to use the bathroom, you have to recite a new bracha afterwards. Why? Because you went to a place where you are not allowed to wear your tefillin while you're using the bathroom. Because you went, or you're not allowed to walk into the bathroom with tefillin on. You went to a place where you can't have tefillin. Now, when you come out, you need a new bracha because you were not able to wear talis. According to the letter of the law, you would have been allowed to bring your talis. It's not right. It's a zila de milsa. It's a zilzal. It's a little disgraceful to the talis, which is used for davening only, and you bring it into a bathroom. It's not right. But according to halacha, the letter of the law, you would be allowed to bring the talis in the bathroom. And therefore, even though you took it off, you don't need to recite a new bracha, even though you went into the bathroom, because the talis is able theoretically to be brought into the bathroom. So it's not considered a interruption, but tefillin would be considered an interruption. Same idea here, that if you interrupted because you couldn't, you were in a dirty place and you weren't allowed to say the Shema, you might have to repeat the whole Shema if you waited, if the amount of time that you were in a dirty place was so long as it would take you to recite the entire Shema. Now comes the Gemara continues and it says, Tanya Kavasei Rav Chizda, Tanya Kavasei Rav Huna. We have brises that agree with this opinion that you would be allowed to walk, say Shema, while you're walking in a dirty place. If a person's walking in these dirty places, he puts his hand over his mouth, and he says Shema, Tanya Kavasei Rav Chizda, and we have a brisa that follows Rav Chizda, and Rav Chizda is the opinion. That it's not allowed, that he said, I swear by Hashem that I wouldn't. If a person was walking in dirty places, I shouldn't say Shema. If a person did say Shema, if a person was in the middle of saying Shema, he should stop. You shouldn't say Shema in such places. What happens if a person didn't stop? What's the din? Amar of Miyasha Bar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. This Rabbi Miyasha says the name of the son of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. There's a few verses that it's very bad what he did, that he said Shema in a dirty place. On him it says the verse, I gave him laws that are not good in Mishpatim that he's not going to live with because he's doing the opposite of what Shema. Shema is supposed to bring life to the person, and he is embarrassing the Shema, and he's doing the opposite of bringing life to him. Ravasi says that another verse, he draws sin with ropes that are weak. In other words, with simple speech, he draws sin on himself. He didn't even do anything, but he said Shema in a dirty place. He's with such weak ropes. He's drawing sin on himself. And Rav Ada Barava Omer Mehachi says another pasuk of Parashat Baza, he is embarrassing the word of Hashem. Now, what happens if he stopped saying Shema because he's in a dirty place? What's his reward? On him it says, you'll have longer, your days will be lengthened. Okay, we're going to stop here. If anyone has any questions, thank you for giving me that extra time. I don't know who's first. I think David. David?
Yeah, my question, I don't know if it's a silly question, but my question is over the phrase of filthy alleyways. Right. So my question is it using the phrase filthy alleyways because that's the normal circumstance, that alleyways are filthy? Or is it saying that if it's filthy, it has to be an alleyway, otherwise it's not a problem with saying Shema, and if it's an alleyway, it has to be filthy in order to stop you from saying Shema. But if it was an alleyway that wasn't filthy, or if it was filthy but not an alleyway, that might have a different effect on the ability to say Shema or not. You follow what I'm saying?
I didn't follow exactly. Again, but I think your question, I think if I could rephrase your question, you're wondering, is an alleyway automatically prohibited to say Shema? And the answer, and you're wondering really if there's dog stuff on the floor, on the ground, and there's, what makes it prohibited? What's considered dirty? And the answer is that it has to be like a real bad smell. It's not just if not just it's not just there's some dirt. We'll soon see actually in the Gemara that even dog stuff is not considered is not considered a problem unless it's really smelly. For example, they used to soak the parchment in the dog stuff. That would make it a huge, terrible smell. So it basically has to do with a real, like when you go behind a garbage truck, if you're driving behind a garbage truck, that is, that's like a mavues hamatu naflis, or sometimes,
That wasn't my question. My question is, if it's a filthy place, but it's not an alleyway, or if it's an alleyway, but it's not a filthy place, the fact that the Gemara is using both terms, filthy and alleyway, does that mean that both conditions are necessary?
Okay, now I got you. Okay. I got you. Okay. It's all about filth. It's not the alleyway. Yeah. It just gives an example, an alleyway, but you're right. Yeah. Okay.